Gemma Di Giorgi was born in the year 1939 in the Sicilian town of Ribera with a condition that made sight inademically impossible. She lacked pupils, the apertures at the center of the eye that allow light to enter. Every ophthalmologist who examined her from birth reached the same conclusion. Without these structures, the eye cannot form an image. She was blind from birth, and according to medical consensus, she would remain. So her grandmother, Maria, refused to treat the diagnosis as final. She was a practical Sicilian woman who did not argue with the science. She simply decided that since medicine had reached its limit, she would take the child to see a Capuchin friar in the province of Focia. This wasn't a decision made in a spirit of naive desperation. Maria had heard accounts of a priest whose own wounds had defied medical explanation for 30 years. She chose San Giovanni Rotondo because every other scientific avenue had been exhausted. For the first 8 years of her life, Gemma's world was defined by sound and texture. She navigated her environment through the weight of her grandmother's hand and the warmth of the sun, which she could feel on her face but could not locate in the sky. Though she lived only 20 kilometers from the coast, the scale and color of the Mediterranean were concepts she could not process. Her spatial reality ended at the tips of her fingers. Her biology dictated a life of permanent darkness. When she and Maria boarded the train for the south of Italy in April 1947, they were traveling toward a destination that Gemma could not even visualize. Traveling through post-war Italy was a slow, arduous process. The journey from Sicily to the rugged Gargano Peninsula covered hundreds of kilometers of irregular rail lines and rough roads, a difficult pilgrimage for an elderly woman and a blind child. They arrived at the church of Santa Maria delle Grazie, joining the massive crowds that gathered daily to attend Padre Pio's Mass. By 1947, the friary had become a global destination for those seeking the inexplicable. Amidst the noise of the thousands waiting outside, 8-year-old Gemma was led to the confessional. She knelt at the wooden grill, preparing for her first confession and her first Holy Communion. The climax of their long journey depended on this quiet encounter inside the booth. The priest spoke only a few words, telling Gemma that the Madonna would make her well. Padre Pio placed his hands over her eyes and offered a simple prayer. There was no theatricality, only a quiet request for the child's healing. The moment occurred at the altar rail during Holy Communion. As Gemma received the Eucharist, she saw a flash of light. Then, the blurred shapes of the church began to resolve into distinct colors and forms. She identified 3 things in immediate succession: the face of the priest, the worn hands of her grandmother kneeling beside her, and the morning light flooding through the church windows. Gemma's sight returned in an instant, and it remained with her for the rest of her life. The medical records from both before and after this day confirm a state that should have been physically impossible. When Gemma returned to Sicily, she was taken back to the same ophthalmologist who had examined her at birth. Their findings were confusing. Gemma could see perfectly, yet her pupils were still entirely absent. This diagram shows Gemma's anatomical reality. The pupil is necessary for light to reach the retina. Without it, the eye is a closed room. Visual data reach the optic nerve by bypassing the missing structures entirely. Sight functioned despite lacking the biological tools. The anatomy of her eyes remained exactly as it had been at birth, yet the function of full sight had been granted. It is a medical paradox verified by independent examinations on both sides of the year 1947 pilgrimage. Gemma Di Giorgi lived into old age, raised a family, and never revised her account. She spoke publicly about her healing for decades, maintaining the same plain, consistent details until the end of her life. This specific paradox is not a matter of folklore. It is preserved in official Vatican records compiled during the formal investigation into Padre Pio's miracles. Gemma never offered a complex theory for how she could see. She always answered. Padre Pio asked the Madonna, and the Madonna said yes. Her life remains a documented anomaly, a case where the medical record and the physical reality refuse to align. Next, a construction worker at Padre Pio's hospital is blinded in a massive explosion. The recovery that followed would leave his surgeons without an explanation. Before you go, if the story of Padre Pio stirred something in you, his faith, his suffering, his miracles, then this journey is just beginning. On Life's Gold Anchor, we uncover powerful, documented stories that challenge what you think you know about faith, the supernatural, and the lives of extraordinary souls. More revelations, more untold stories, more moments that will stay with you long after the video ends. Subscribe now and become part of a growing community seeking truth, faith, and deeper understanding. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode of Padre Pio, Servant of Miracles. Because some stories aren't just watched, they are experienced.